Hello there, curious minds and rhythm seekers. Before we dive deep into the thunderous world of drums, a world that's been beating in the background of human existence since who knows when, grab your favorite seat, maybe a comfy chair by a window, or, hey, stand up and get ready to feel the pulse. Because today, we're tracing the very origins of rhythm itself. Not the fancy rhythms that make you dance at clubs or scroll through viral TikToks, but the primal rhythm that courses through every living thing, the human heartbeat. That first stubborn thump inside your chest, it's not just a biological metronome keeping blood pumping. It's the original soundtrack of life. The heartbeat is nature's oldest drum, an unending pulse that connects you to every ancestor who ever lived, and to the wild creatures prowling forests or serenading the night sky. Imagine that for a second, the idea that something as intimate as your heartbeat is a shared language across time and species. It's rhythm, yes, but it's also a story told in beats and echoes, in war cries and lullabies, in the quiet moments of prayer and upheavals of rebellion. Now, put yourself back thousands of years, before cities, before written words. What does communication look like? Shouting across a valley? Smoke signals? Maybe, but far more powerful, far more immediate is the drumbeat, a thunderous boom that cuts through the wilderness, paddles slicing river moons, footsteps treading the earth. Drums became the first megaphones. No batteries required, just flesh, wood, and air. Their sound waves rippled over hills and across rivers, carrying messages faster than any traveler. From the rhythmic pounding warning of approaching danger to the complex codes that announced festivals or summoned warriors, drums turned sound into a survival tool. It wasn't just about shouting warnings in the dark. Drums tapped into something deeper, something that felt almost sacred. Their booming hearts echoed the very rhythm of life. Early humans noticed this, of course. The drum doesn't only shout, it invites. It mimics the heartbeat and pulls the human heart in return, luring it into a trance that welcomes connection, sacrifice, and transformation. Tribal rituals, ancient ceremonies, rites of passage, they all hinged on the drum's steady, hypnotic thump. The drum becomes more than an instrument. It's a bridge to the spiritual realm, a heartbeat made audible and communal. The collective pulse synced up, body and spirit aligned, as the world seemed to pulse with a single life force. If you've ever watched a tribal dance or a shamanic ritual, that pounding drum isn't just background noise. It's the universe speaking in a language older than words, invoking spirits, calling ancestors, stirring the soul. And it's no coincidence that the word rhythm itself comes from the Greek rhythmos, which means measured flow. In other words, an order to the chaos. The drum beat cuts through the noise of nature's randomness, imposing a structured pulse where there was only wild sound. Rhythm became the lifeline, the tether between individuals and the cosmos at large. But drums are not merely ancient relics or sacred objects. They have also served as a tool of resistance. From the African jungles to the enslaved plantations of the Americas, the drum was a voice when others were violently silenced. Laws tried to ban drumming, yet whole governments feared a rhythm. Why? Because drum beats carry messages, even secret ones. They were coded communications, rallying cries that fueled revolts and sustained hope. The sacred heartbeat of a people beaten down was also a call to action, a reminder that no matter the chains, their spirit still pulsed defiantly. The drum was the original social network, encrypted and immediate, connecting oppressed communities through sound waves that traveled far beyond the reach of the oppressors. Consider this. During the transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans were forced into brutal conditions where language was often restricted or broken. But their drums spoke a language that no master could fully silence. Those drum beats carried not only rhythmic patterns, but the coded plans for rebellion and survival. The British colonialists in the Caribbean and Africa recognized this and tried to outlaw the drums outright, fearing their power. But rhythm finds a way. Drums hid in plain sight, disguised as laughter, as work songs, even as church music. That heartbeat endured, a pulse of resistance, defiance, and unyielding humanity. So, what is it about the drum that commands such magnetic power across history? Why do we respond to a steady boom as if it's a call carved into our DNA? The answer lies in its primal connection to the human body, where rhythm starts and ends with the heartbeat. Before words, before written laws, before telegraphs and texts, our ancestors heard the steady thump of their own chests and found meaning in it. The drum amplified that meaning, turning solitude into community, fear into courage, chaos into unity. Take a moment now to listen to your own heartbeat. Feel the pulse, steady and relentless, never ceasing, never wavering. Imagine that pulse echoed into the ancient forests, across deserts and oceans, shaping the very fabric of cultures and histories. Drums are not just noise. They are life's first language. They have narrated our stories, marked our celebrations, mourned our losses, and powered resistance movements with a universal truth that life, no matter how oppressed, will keep beating. This is just the beginning of a journey through time and culture where drum beats reveal the unseen and unheard layers of human experience. As you sit there, the subtle thump inside you is more than biology. It's connection. It's the pulse of your ancestors, the heartbeat of rebellion, the rhythm of ritual, all converging in those simple, ancient drums that have shaped and shaken the world since the dawn of humanity. So, ready to feel that beat? The drum roll of history has started. Let's listen closely. It's calling for us all. Imagine a world devoid of words, letters, or even grunts that resemble language. A landscape where sound waves are all there is to bridge the depth between isolated minds. Now, picture the earliest humans, our ancestors, those scruffy beings lumbering around in oversized animal skins, navigating a wild, untamed earth. Among the cacophony of snapping twigs, rustling leaves, and distant predator calls, there arises a curious rhythmic pounding, a heartbeat echoing through the primeval forest. This rudimentary beat, born not from a sophisticated instrument, but from a clever slap on hollow wood or a tap on a drum-like object fashioned from natural materials, marks the dawn of one of humanity's most enduring sound inventions, the drum. Long before the invention of speech as we know it, early humans stumbled upon percussion, not just by accident, but through what was undeniably an intuitive spark of genius. Why? Because sound travels faster and farther than sight. Thunderous stomping, sharp knocks, and repetitive clatters on hollow logs became the prehistoric equivalent of a group chat. But instead of emojis and GIFs, it was just pure, raw rhythm. These early beats served urgent, practical purposes first. Imagine being a member of a nomadic hunter-gatherer group. Suddenly, there's danger. A prowling saber-tooth or a rival clan encroaching. Shouting? Useless. Running? Risky. With the power to send Morse code-like signals via drumming, groups could warn each other across vast distances. It was like primitive radio powered by sticks and skin. The farther and louder the beat, the swifter the message. Move! Danger! Feast tonight! The drum was the original social media notification. But the drum's significance was far more profound than alerting group members or coordinating hunts. Think of it as the first social glue, more effective than awkward small talk or forced group selfies. The repetitive beat encouraged synchronized movement, causing early humans to unite in dance and celebration. That relentless pulse tapped into something primal in the human brain, igniting feelings of togetherness and shared identity. Science today would explain this through neurochemical releases and synchronized neural oscillations. But back then, it was probably just people wanting to let loose after a hard day of foraging and evading predators. Imagine a twilight campfire scene, the flames licking the sky, the air thick with smoke, and the steady, hypnotic drum beat reverberating through the night. Around the fire, bodies begin to sway. Hands clap, feet stomp, all syncing with the primal rhythm. It's more than a party. This is ritual. At its core, drumming back then was a ritualistic act that blurred the lines between humans and the spiritual or unseen world. The beat mimicked the heartbeat of the earth. or so they believed. It killed time for sure, but it also summoned spirits, gods, and ancestors. People danced so fiercely that shamans would enter trance states, journeying beyond the veil. The drum was a portal. There's archaeological evidence supporting this mystical role. Cave paintings and burial sites adorned with drum remnants hint not merely at entertainment, but at sacred ceremonies. The placement of a drum in a grave suggests it was more than an object. It was a companion to the afterlife, or maybe a talisman, offering protection through rhythmic magic. If you think that sounds a little like ancient cosplay with a banging soundtrack, you're not far off. Early humans didn't have straightforward drum kits, obviously. Think hollowed-out logs, animal skins stretched taut, bones, gourds, whatever resonated when struck. The materials used naturally defined the sound's character and could communicate something unique. A deep, booming thump might mean gather quickly, while a sharp slap conveyed be cautious. It's as if they were developing a very early code of percussion, years before anyone had the luxury of spelling out their feelings in a tweet. This early form of tactile talking also became a powerful tool of resistance and identity in some pockets of prehistoric society. If you were an outsider, you might not understand the beat patterns, the rhythms tied to clan or family groups. The drum could exclude as easily as it included, setting cultural boundaries that were fiercely guarded. Imagine if every community had its own tribal Spotify playlist that outsiders couldn't tune into without risking dire consequences. The drum beat was a protector of secrets, histories, and stories. But here's the kicker. The heartbeat of the drum isn't just metaphorical, it's literal. Human beating hearts and the drumming rhythm in nature mirror each other. This connection was likely recognized subconsciously even before words existed. Drumming synchronized body rhythms in group members, calming fear and fostering cooperation. Both hunter and hunted are locked into patterns dictated by heartbeat-like pulses. Early humans might have sensed this connection intuitively, embedding the drum's rhythm into the fabric of their social and spiritual lives without needing a fancy PowerPoint presentation. So, what do we make of all this pounding, tapping, and slapping that echoed through those ancient shadowy forests? It was a revolutionary step, the transformation of raw nature into culture, chaos into order through the rhythm of the drum. The drum was the voice of community, the pulse of survival, the chant of spirit, and a symbol of identity before written language ever arrived. It was, and continues to be, a universal heartbeat of humanity, pounding away beneath skin and bone. Not bad for something as simple as hitting a log with a stick, eh? Almost makes you wonder if the next time your phone buzzes with a notification, you might pay a little respect to those long-ago humans who first turned a roll of thunder into a message, a dance, a prayer, and a rallying cry. The story of the drum is a story about us, our need to connect, to warn, to celebrate, to remember, and maybe just to make some noise in an otherwise silent world. Before the advent of instant messaging, email, and those obnoxiously persistent group chat notifications, humans found ingenious ways to say, "Hey, over here," and "Danger ahead." Enter the drum, the heartbeat of human connection, pulsing not just with rhythm, but with meaning, stretching across valleys, jungles, and savannas. Drums weren't just instruments for banging out catchy tunes at a party. They were vital, intricate tools of communication, carrying entire languages through the airwaves long before anyone dreamed of Wi-Fi. Imagine standing on the edge of a dense African forest centuries ago, where the only way to send urgent news was to rely on sound waves penetrating through thick foliage and uneven terrain. Enter the talking drum, a marvel of auditory engineering that could modulate pitch and tone, mimicking the patterns of spoken language. Unlike your average drum that just went boom or bang, these drums could whisper secrets, shout warnings, or even compose love letters, all drummed out in patterns only the initiated could decipher. In West Africa, such drums, variously called dundun, tama, or tama, depending on the region, were capable of replicating the tonal languages famously rich in pitch distinctions. This meant that a skilled drummer could transmit complex grammatical structures and messages using nothing more than rhythm and tone variation. It's as if Morse code got a cultural upgrade, sparkling with the nuance and emotional depth of actual speech. These talking drums were no mere novelties or party tricks. They had real power, social, political, and spiritual. Town criers and royal messengers wielded talking drums like ancient smartphones, but without the battery anxiety. A message sent from the palace could ripple out to distant villages, alerting the people to festivals, tribal meetings, or, more pressingly, impending threats. But don't think this was a simple game of telephone. The drums encoded messages with precision, and drummers were respected as linguistic maestros, capable of interpreting and transmitting the pulse of their people. Miss a beat, and you might accidentally call the villagers to a war dance when it's actually a peace celebration. A mistake with rather explosive consequences. Across the Atlantic in North America, indigenous peoples developed their own drum-based communication systems, just as sophisticated but forged from different cultural and environmental needs. Native American signal drums played a critical role in community life, as flags or wildfire alerts might today. When words would falter across miles of forest or plains, the steady, low thump of the drum could carry warnings of approaching enemies or announce moments of joy and mourning alike. Take the Plains tribes, for example. Their drums, often strapped horizontally and played with great physical force, created booming reverberations that could be felt in the chest as well as heard with the ears. These vibrations weren't random. They echoed traditional rhythms embedded with meaning, folding time, memory, and communal identity into each beat. It was a tangible way of saying, "We are here, united and watchful, without a single syllable spoken." You might wonder how effective these drums were at carrying messages over distance. Some accounts suggest that the rhythmic signals could be heard up to several miles away, especially when the terrain cooperated. That's a lot farther than your average shout. But it wasn't just volume that mattered. It was the pattern, the silence between the beats, the shift in cadence that transformed the drum's voice into a language. And here's the clincher. The people who understood these rhythms had a shared code, an oral knowledge passed down through generations, often jealously guarded. Outsiders might hear the drumming, but not decode the message, much like overhearing a secret conversation in a foreign language. This exclusivity made drum communication a potent tool not just for connection, but for resistance and control. Speaking of resistance, drums also played a darker, more defiant role in history. When colonial powers came knocking, eager to impose new rules and devastate native cultures, drums became instruments of survival and subtle rebellion. Colonial regimes often banned or restricted drum use, fearing that these primitive technologies could be weaponized by local populations to organize uprisings or maintain cultural cohesion. Yet, the bans didn't silence the drums. In the shadows and under moonlight, communities continued to communicate in secret their hopes, plans, and lamentations. The resilience of drum language represented a refusal to be erased, a heartbeat of cultural identity beating defiantly against the imposed silence. What's fascinating is that long before we waved our phones around sharing viral memes, these rhythmic conversations were already bridging gaps between villages separated by rugged mountains or dense forests, between tribes speaking different dialects but sharing a drumbeat, and even between the living and the divine. Drums were, and still are in many places, a language beyond words, a universal code of human presence. Even the physicality of drumming works on another level, loud, visceral, and primal, because it taps into something deeply biological. Humans are wired for rhythm. Our hearts beat in steady pattern, our breath flows cyclically, our brains even respond to patterns in sound. So when a drum beats out a message, it's not just processed intellectually, but felt emotionally and physically. It's an immediate, almost instinctual mode of communication. Fast forward to today, and some communities are keeping this tradition alive exactly as their ancestors did. No apps required. Drumming circles, ritual performances, and cultural festivals often emphasize that same core function, communication through rhythm, a shared heartbeat echoing across generations. But there's also a haunting awareness of what has been lost, where drum languages faded under the pressure of modernization and colonial suppression. In essence, drums were among humanity's first network systems, the original long-distance communication devices. They defy the modern assumption that to advance you need complex technology wired in silicon or coded in binary. Sometimes, all it takes is a hollow log and the right hands to unlock an entire world of messages. So next time you hear a drum beat, don't just tap your foot. Listen closely. That rhythm might be carrying more than just a groove. It could be a story, a warning, a call to arms, or a sacred song hidden in plain sound, echoing the pulse of human connection across time. Imagine the beat of a drum, not just banging rhythms for dance or war, but a pulse echoing through the very fabric of existence itself. For countless indigenous cultures around the world, drums have never been mere instruments. They are the sacred heartbeat of the cosmos, guiding shamans into trance, calling forth gods, and marking moments where the physical world blurs into the spiritual. Beneath that steady thump lies a portal, a bridge between what we see and what we only dare to believe in. From the remotest corners of Siberia to the lush Amazon rainforests, the drum's spiritual role is strikingly consistent, revealing an ancient, almost instinctual human understanding that rhythm connects us to something bigger. The drum does not just make noise, it shapes the very space we occupy. It's like the Wi-Fi signal of the soul, but instead of your phone, it's your heart and mind tuning in. Take the Siberian shamans, for instance. Their drums are not simply wooden discs with stretched animal skin. They are living maps of the cosmos, designed to help these spiritual intermediaries ascend into other worlds. The shaman's rhythmic beating mimics the pulse of the universe itself, with every strike acting as a step along a mystical ladder. In their ceremonies, this beating isn't casual. It's a calculated invitation for spirits to join the earthly realm. These rituals could last for hours, their trance-inducing rhythms peeling away layers of ordinary consciousness until the shaman emerges as a vessel for divine wisdom or healing. It's fascinating and a little eerie that the drum's low-frequency vibrations literally affect the human brain. Modern science confirms what indigenous people have known for millennia. Certain repetitive rhythms can alter brainwave patterns, fostering trance-like states, heightened awareness, and deep meditative experiences. When you hear that pulse, your body doesn't just listen, it responds on cellular levels. Though you might think drumming is just a party starter, in these spiritual contexts, it's serious business, a pathway to altered realities. Across the Pacific in Australia, Aboriginal peoples have long used similar techniques, where the drum underpins connection not only to each other, but to their land and ancestors. The didgeridoo, a cousin to the drum in its droning rhythmic qualities, facilitates ceremonies that evoke ancestral spirits and the dream time, the sacred epoch when the world was formed. In these rituals, drum beats often imitate natural rhythms, like the heartbeat of the earth, the flow of water, or the call of animals. It's a sonic storytelling that keeps cultural memory alive, making the invisible visible, the distant near. Some ceremonies demanded the drum's presence as a central pillar of spiritual power. Among the Yoruba of West Africa, for example, the talking drum could summon particular orishas, gods of thunder, fertility, or the winds. These drums didn't just signal a ritual. Their rhythms were coded messages, languages unto themselves. Drumming here was a divine communicade where rhythm talked back and forth between mortal and deity. It's as if the drum held a spiritual phone line, ringing sacred intentions across the veil. Even more gripping is how drums served as instruments of transformation. In Native American traditions, the drum is often called the heartbeat of Mother Earth. By engaging with the drum's beat during ceremonies, participants entered states where the boundaries between human and spirit, earth and sky, past and present, seemed to dissolve. Drumming was a vehicle for healing, vision quests, and rites of passage. For a moment, the universe's chaotic noise quieted, aligning human rhythms with cosmic order. What's truly remarkable is how universal this drum-spirit connection is. Independent cultures, thousands of miles apart, stumbled on the same fundamental idea. Rhythmic sound, particularly from drums, was not just entertainment, it was communion. It was an ancient, instinctive technology for transcending the mundane. No smartphones needed, just skill, patience, and the will to connect. Yet, it's important not to romanticize. Drumming's spiritual power was often tightly controlled by designated figures, the shamans, priests, or elders, guardians of sacred knowledge. Misusing the drum could invite disaster or madness, as the veil between worlds is thin and tricky. There are records of drummers who fell into trance for days, lost in spiritual labyrinths, and communities who blamed failed harvests or misfortunes on improper rhythms or neglected drum ceremonies. The drum was a sacred trust, as dangerous as it was holy. Drumming also marked life's starkest moments, the death and rebirth cycles. In many cultures, drums guided souls between worlds, providing rhythm for the deceased's journey to the afterlife or transformations into ancestral spirits. The beat was a lifeline in those narrow moments when the living and the dead brush against one another. This is not just symbolic, it's a hardwired part of these cultures' cosmologies. Let's be honest. For a modern observer, we often overlook this dimension. To us, a drum is a musical instrument, a tool for entertainment, maybe a workout timer for joggers. But that view misses the drum's primal power to alter consciousness, to hold the threshold between life and death, human and divine. It's a kind of analog, prehistoric VR headset, coaxing participants into deep spiritual experience without any batteries or screens. Perhaps the most powerful testament to this spiritual role lies in the drum's persistence. Even under centuries of colonization, forced conversions, and assaults on indigenous traditions, many communities kept their drums hidden yet alive, sometimes silenced, sometimes buried, but never forgotten. Their responses to persecution weren't just about survival, they were acts of resistance. Drumming upheld identity, spirituality, and connection to ancestral lands despite overwhelming attacks. In drumming rituals, then, we find the pulse of human resilience. The drumbeat is more than sound. It's a heartbeat that refuses to stop, a rhythmic defiance echoing through centuries. And as the ancient drums call out, they remind us that beneath the surface of the noise, there's always a deeper vibration, linking us back to the sacred, the mysterious, and the whole wild cosmos. Imagine the thunderous clash of armies, banners snapping in the wind, faces smeared with sweat and determination. And somewhere in the chaos, a steady beat cutting through the noise. It's not just noise, it's control, command, and a signal to move, fight, or fall back. The drum, more than just a musical instrument, it became the heartbeat of military power, a device wielded by leaders to orchestrate chaos, inspire courage, and intimidate foes. Long before megaphones and encrypted radios, the drum was the original battlefield communicator. No whispering orders, no clipped Morse code, just raw, unfiltered rhythm punching through the din of war. One rhythm meant charge, another meant retreat. These patterns weren't random. They were carefully designed codes, a percussion language drilled into soldiers until muscle memory took over. The sound had to slice through the cacophony of clashing swords and screaming soldiers. Rough terrain, wind, even the enemy's own counter-drums, the drum had to win this sonic war. It was the ancient battlefield's version of a smartphone notification, urgent, attention-grabbing, and non-negotiable. Take the armies of ancient China, for example. Generals didn't shout orders over the cacophony of war. Their armies responded to the boom and roll of massive war drums. Those rhythms were as vital as a GPS app today. Need to flank left? Drum cadence. Order to hold the line? Different beat. It was communication stripped to its bare essence, primitive, visceral, and brilliant. And it wasn't just functional, it was psychological warfare. That relentless pounding stirred something primal in the heart of every soldier. Unity, urgency, fearlessness. Then there's the psychological game played not just within one's own ranks, but against the enemy. Imagine being a soldier facing not only the barrage of weapons, but a relentless wall of drum beats pulsing through your bones. The rhythmic pounding was designed to intimidate, to make the opposing force feel smaller, weaker, and overwhelmed. Sound as a weapon, the drum was the original sound bomb. But the drum didn't stop at mere communication or psychological warfare on the battlefield. Once generals and kings saw the raw power of these rhythms, they harnessed them to project military strength beyond the front lines, straight into the splendor of royal courts and ceremonial arenas. If you think about it, parading with a squadron of regal drummers is like today's flashy military flyovers or those meticulously choreographed parades that scream, "Look at us, we're in charge here." Drums proclaimed imperial authority, reminding everyone, friends, foes, and sycophants alike, who held the power. In the courts of Europe, armies often brought their drums into statecraft, turning war signals into pompous ceremonial rhythms. The steady beat wasn't just for order, it was spectacle. In England, the marching beat became an auditory symbol of royal presence, stirring pride and obedience alike. These drums underscored the seriousness of military power, but also the pageantry, the theatrical show of strength designed to awe spectators. The line between war and performance blurred, and the drum was always center stage. In West Africa, things took a slightly different, but no less impactful turn. Royal courts featured talking drums that imitated speech patterns, not just rhythms. These drums conveyed messages to both rally warriors and enforce courtly discipline. Some kingdoms wielded them as strategic tools to maintain control and intimidate internal dissent. The drum was more than a symbol of power. It was the voice of authority. When drums echoed through the town square, citizens knew the ruler's eyes and ears were everywhere. It was like having a public service announcement blasted by a megaphone that nobody dared ignore. Drums in these royal and military contexts also reinforced hierarchy. Drummers themselves occupied a curious position, both respected and feared. Their role demanded skill and secrecy. Only they held the keys to the rhythmic language that commanded armies and controlled crowds. Imagine having the power to stop an entire battalion in its tracks, or signal a full retreat, simply by changing your pattern of strikes. Talk about job security. Even in Native American cultures, drums played a pivotal role in military and ritual contexts. As warriors prepared for battle, rhythmic drumming was central to building courage and unity. The drum beat didn't just inspire individual bravery, it welded siblings in arms into a single living organism, synchronized by sound. This unity was crucial in battles that often depended less on numbers and more on esprit de corps. The drum forged bonds that rifles and arrows alone couldn't. But let's not romanticize the drum too much. Behind the rhythmic glory lurked harsh realities. In many armies, drummers were often chosen from the weakest conscripts, their survival dependent on their ability to keep beating the rhythm while blood and death tore across the battlefield. They were the unsung heroes or martyrs whose steady hands maintained order in the maelstrom, yet who were also prime targets. The drum's pulse was life itself, but the drummer's life was often precariously balanced. Back in Europe, the military drum's double-edged nature became clear during the brutal Napoleonic Wars. The pounding drumbeats helped coordinate massive troop maneuvers, sometimes tens of thousands of soldiers moving in unison like a living machine. But when the music stopped and bullets flew, the same drum could no longer protect the men it rallied. And as warfare evolved, drums became more than tools of command. They were symbols of national pride and unity. It's no coincidence that military marches played on drums and brass bands still echo in modern armies. Our modern military ceremonies, with their rigid steps and synchronized music, owe their very existence to the ancient rhythm makers who first cracked the code of martial communication. Even in an age of drones and encrypted messages, the drum holds a special place as a symbol of order amid chaos. So, next time you hear a drum beat in a movie battle scene, remember, it's not just background sound. It's a centuries-old ritual of power, a coded message from generals past. That relentless pounding was once the sharp word shouted by kings and commanders, a command that could turn the tide of war, summon courage, or crush rebellion. More than a simple instrument, the drum was the human heartbeat of military might, pulsing with authority, fear, and the raw, unyielding force of history itself. It's hard to overstate just how central drums have been to the pulse of African life. Imagine a continent where the heartbeat of a community doesn't come from a single speaker or a smartphone notification, but from the skin of hollowed wood, vibrating in a rhythm that's both ancient and alive. Drums, in many African cultures, are not just instruments. They are voices, messengers, storytellers, and sometimes even warriors in disguise. Long before the age of WhatsApp or satellite phones, drums served as an intricate language system that transcended hundreds of miles, conveying messages with astonishing precision. Some might think that tapping on a drum is just noise, random beats echoing through villages. But in regions like West Africa, the talking drums are masters of disguise, modulating pitch and rhythm to mimic the tonal patterns of speech. It's almost like seeing a Morse code come to life, only far richer and more complex. Picture this: a drummer in a small Yoruba village picks up his dun-dun, the legendary talking drum, shaped like an hourglass, but capable of endless sonic expression. With subtle pressure on the drum's chords, the pitch rises and falls, bending words and sentences into rhythmic poetry. To the untrained ear, it's just beatboxing. To those who grew up with these rhythms, it's a full-blown conversation. And those conversations were vital. Whether announcing births, deaths, warnings of approaching enemies, or tribal meetings, the talking drum was the 24/7 news network that required no electricity and no Wi-Fi, just skill, memory, and a well-tuned ear. But beyond mere communication, drums were and still are the heart that unites communities. Take the intricate ceremonies of the Ashanti people in present-day Ghana. When the drums start, it's as if the land itself breathes and listens. The rhythms create a shared space that dissolves the boundaries between individuals. Drumming isn't background noise. It's the main event, the glue that holds families and clans together. It summons ancestors, calls out to spirits, and summons the living to stand witness. In these moments, drums do something magical. They transform from instruments into symbols of identity and collective memory. They remind everyone of their place in the world, not just as isolated beings, but as part of a connected, vibrant fabric stretching back through countless generations. To refuse the drum beat, to ignore its call, would be to deny a fundamental part of what it means to belong. And then there's the raw power of drums as a form of resistance. If you think of protest signs and slogans as the weapons of the modern activist, the drum was often the original tool for mobilizing dissent and safeguarding culture under threat. Far from a quaint tradition, drumming was subversive. Colonizing powers frequently tried to outlaw or control musical practices, fearful of their unifying potential. The French in West Africa, for example, banned certain drums because they believed these noisy relics could incite rebellion. Spoiler alert, they were right. When enslaved Africans were ripped from their homelands and shipped across the Atlantic, drums did not survive the journey. Instead, their absence spoke volumes. Slave owners forbade drums, terrified that the rhythms might spark coordination or rebellion. But the spirit of the drum refused to be silenced. In secret gatherings, in whispered songs and clapping rhythms reinvented from scratch, the ancestral beat endured. The drum's essence survived in other forms: syncopated handclaps, stomping feet, the call and response chants that became the soul of new musical genres like blues and jazz. It was a heartbeat beating beneath oppression. Back on the continent, the craftsmanship behind drum making itself is a cultural marvel. These aren't factory-made, one-size-fits-all pieces of wood and hide. Each drum is unique, chosen with care, seasoned with rituals, and carved to match the specific needs of its community or the particular sounds required. The materials speak too: hollowed tree trunks, cured animal skins, animal horns sometimes used as resonators, each element infusing the instrument with character and meaning. And drumming is not just an auditory experience. It's a full-body ritual. Watch a master drummer at work, and you'll notice the dance-like movements, the commanding gestures, even the sweat dripping down. Each strike a physical dialogue between player and instrument. Drumming is a performance, but more than that, it's a sacrament, a ceremony, a declaration. The energy ripples outwards, linking players, dancers, singers, and listeners into a symbiotic exchange of life force, memory, and emotion. African drums also carry stories of migration and trade, influencing and being influenced by neighboring cultures. Take the influence of the djembe, for instance, which originates from the Mandi peoples of West Africa, but has spread across the continent and beyond, adapting and evolving along the way. The djembe's name even translates roughly to "everyone gather together in peace," which perfectly captures its social role. It's used to settle disputes, celebrate harvests, or just mark a good time, but always serves as a reminder that community is forged in rhythm. In some remote places, the drum was literally a timekeeper of life's milestones. Births, initiations into adulthood, marriages, and deaths all had their distinct drum signatures, rhythms recognized instantly by locals. You hear a particular beat, you know exactly what's happening and where to go. In a way, the drum is a living archive, its rhythms telling stories that written words might miss, preserving histories in ways that only a pulse can convey. So the African drum is anything but simple noise. It's language, message, identity, chant, and cry. It has power because it's accessible. Anyone who can master the rhythm can speak through it. Yet it's complex, demanding deep knowledge, skill, and respect. It links the humble craftsman, the village griot, the royal court, and the community festival. To sit in the drum circle is to understand the heartbeat of Africa in a manner no textbooks could convey. Maybe next time you hear a drum beat at a festival, a concert, or even on your headphones, take a moment to remember its roots. Underneath those beats is a legacy of resilience, connection, and unyielding spirit. Drums are not just the soundtrack of Africa, they are its pulse. And through their rhythms, the continent's story continues to be told, again and again, with every strike
on the skin.
Imagine a drum beat, a simple thump, 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 rippling through the air, weaving itself into the very fabric of movement and celebration. It's more than just sound. The drum is the heartbeat given a voice, a tireless engine powering the dance floor of human history. From dense African jungles to the sun-baked plazas of Mesoamerica, the marriage between drum and dance is a story as old as civilization itself, a tale where rhythm literally makes the world go round. You see, in many cultures, drums don't just accompany dance, They command it, dictate its tempo, flavor its mood. The dancer is no mere passenger. They're part of a complex conversation between skin and leather, foot and earth, motion and emotion. The drum's pulse sparks the body into action, transforming ordinary movement into something sacred, communal, sometimes wild. And it's not just about fun, though there's plenty of that. It's about identity, transition, and resistance. Take rites of passage, for example. The fiery, nerve-wracking celebrations where a child becomes an adult, a soul crosses into the spirit world, or a warrior dons the mantle of legend. Drums mark these moments like clock hands spinning the wheel of life. In the Dogon culture of Mali, for instance, the complex rhythm of the djembe isn't mere background noise. It's a map, a coded message guiding the initiate through a labyrinth of tradition and spiritual revelation. As the drums pound, dancers embody ancestral wisdom, feet pounding the earth in sync with a cosmic beat that's been alive for centuries. And if you think of dance as a universal language, drums are the alphabet. Clacking and rolling out words, sentences, entire stories. They create a communal joy where the collective heartbeat beats stronger than any solo performer. It's in that shared rhythm where individuals lose themselves, becoming instead vibrant threads in the larger tapestry of their community. Without the drums, the dance falters, the story stutters, and the community's pulse would weaken. Consider the way festive drums summon people, like some irresistible party app notification that can't be ignored. In the Caribbean, the steel drum is practically shorthand for a carnival invitation. But the roots of these celebrations trace back to African drumming traditions, where rhythms rallied villages, lifted spirits, and forged bonds within the community. It was here, amid the clamoring chaos of dance and drum, that joy became an act of resilience, especially during times when oppression sought to silence cultural expression. The rhythms endured, adapted, and thrived, fueling festivities that celebrated freedom, defiance, and shared humanity. Drum rhythms also have a magnetic power to shape not just the steps, but the very emotions that ripple through a crowd. Fast, frenetic beats can send bodies spiraling into ecstatic frenzy, a near trance where limits blur and personal inhibitions dream away. Slow, deliberate beats crawl like shadows, intimate and haunting, gently nudging dancers into a more meditative communion with themselves and each other. In Balinese gamelan performances, for example, the interplay of percussive instruments creates a sonic architecture within which dancers move through spiritual narratives so intricate they could rival an epic novel. But beware, this isn't always sunshine and fireworks. In some cases, the beating drum was a tool of control as much as it was of celebration. Colonial regimes quickly learned that controlling the drum meant controlling the dance, which in turn meant controlling the gathering, the uprising, the culture itself. Enforced bans on drumming and dance aimed to sever the vital connection between people and their heritage, trying to reduce living culture to dull silence. Yet time and again, communities smuggled their rhythms back into existence, hidden behind closed doors or disguised within innocuous hand claps and foot taps. The drum was resilient, a revolutionary at the heart of resistance. And so, dance and drums are forever tangled in a knot of human experience. Festivals bursting with riotous sound and movement aren't just parties, they're statements. They declare, we are here, we belong, we remember. The sound of a drum in the distance can bring an entire village running, energized, alive. It's a call to move, to celebrate, to transform. Drums are bridges connecting the individual's body to the collective soul, the physical to the spiritual, the mundane to the ecstatic. They punctuate ceremonies with urgency, frame dances with narrative, and turn a crowd into a pulse that might just echo through time. Without them, the dance is just movement, and what's life without a little rhythm? So next time you find yourself tapping your foot unconsciously or feeling an inexplicable urge to move along to distant thumps on a street corner, remember this: that beat is centuries old, carrying stories of joy, sorrow, power, and persistence, all rolled into one irresistible rhythm. The dance will always follow, because in the grand, chaotic symphony of human existence, the drum keeps the heartbeat alive. Imagine a drum beat echoing through deep forests, across sprawling plains, or rippling over vast rivers, thumping rhythms carrying messages far beyond the reach of spoken words. In indigenous societies across the Americas, drums were never just instruments. They were living channels of communication, history, and identity. From the icy tundras of the north to the steamy Amazon rainforests down south, the drum served as a critical thread, weaving together the social, spiritual, and political fabric of countless communities. Far before telegrams and cell towers, before smoke signals became quaint historical footnotes, the drum was the ultimate networking device. But it wasn't just about speed or distance. The drum could speak a language all its own. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of Morse code, pulsing messages transmitted with astonishing subtlety and precision. Among the Cherokee in the southeastern woodlands, for instance, specific drum patterns could summon warriors, call clans to council, or mark the arrival of distinguished guests. Those beats carried nuance, urgency, respect, warning, even celebration. It's not unlike how we today decode complex emotions through a friend's voice on a call, except the voice was a hollowed log, skin stretched taut, vibrating with life. Yet the drums were more than mere messengers. They were living archives. In many indigenous cultures, oral history was sacred, and drums helped preserve that heritage. Stories weren't penned down on paper, but were recited, chanted, and rhythmically punctuated by drum beats. The Quechua people in the Andes used the drum not only to uphold mythological tales, but also to encode genealogies, treaties, and laws. Every drum pattern was a story told in sound, a memory etched into the pulses of skin. Imagine that, the heartbeat of a people preserved in sound waves, passed on generation after generation without a single written word. Its oral history with a literal pulse. The social structure within indigenous societies was also rhythmically defined by these drums. Gatherings, rituals, and ceremonies all hinged on who played the drum, how it was played, and where it was positioned. For many Native American tribes, the drum was a symbol of sovereignty and cultural identity. In the Lakota Sioux Nation, the drum circle embodied the community's heartbeat, physically connected through shared rhythms, binding the individuals into a cohesive, living organism. A drum wasn't casually wielded. It was treated with reverence, often passed down as a treasured heirloom from one generation's drumkeeper to the next. To disrespect the drum was to disrespect the very soul of the tribe. But perhaps the most defiant and desperate power of the drum reveals itself in the darker chapters of colonial history. When European conquest swept across the Americas, indigenous drums were often banned, destroyed, or demonized. Colonizers, always terrified by the prospect of rebellion, frequently outlawed drum use, fearing their capacity to unite resistance movements and send warnings across great distances. Yet, indigenous communities found ways to keep the heartbeat alive in the shadows. Drums went underground, quiet, coded, imperceptible to the untrained ear. The rhythm of resistance beat on, carried in secret ceremonies beneath the cover of night, in hidden enclaves where culture could persist despite attempts at erasure.
South of
the continent, among the Afro-Indigenous peoples in the Amazon and the Caribbean, drums took on additional layers of meaning. The confluence of indigenous, African, and European cultures gave rise to vibrant hybrid traditions where drums became powerful symbols of survival and syncretism. Here, the drum was not only a bridge to the past, but also a weapon against cultural extinction, a catharsis for enslaved peoples, and a joyful expression of newly forged identities. It's hard to overstate the drum's significance in these contexts, a lifeline between memory, spirituality, and rebellion. Even the physical construction of these drums offers a glimpse into the interconnectedness of culture and environment. Indigenous artisans selected specific woods, animal hides, and natural materials, imbuing each drum with spiritual significance. The choice wasn't random. The drum's voice was shaped by nature's gift, echoing the landscape itself. The deep, coppery thump of a cedar drum tells a different story than the sharp snap of a deerskin stretched over hollowed oak. Each drum was unique, a sonic fingerprint of its maker's world and worldview. But perhaps the most astonishing feature of the drum lies not in its sound or material, but in its ability to transcend the mere boundaries of place and time. Its rhythm, persistent and primal, taps into something universal. It reminds us that beneath the vast diversity of indigenous peoples across the Americas, whether crowning the peaks of the Rockies or dwelling along the Amazon basin, there beats a shared human heart. The drum is the heartbeat made audible, a pulse that counts out the complex symphony of community life, memory, ceremony, and resistance. If ever you find yourself in a remote village or at an indigenous festival, listen closely. The drum is still talking, telling stories that span centuries, warning and welcoming, celebrating life amidst hardship. It's a reminder that before emails, social media, or even words, the human heartbeat was found in the steady thrum of a drum, reverberating through the ages with an unyielding method. Still we are, still alive, still connected, still beating strong. Drums have long been the pulse beneath the surface of Asian civilizations, beating hearts that echo through valleys, temple courtyards, and battlefields alike. But these instruments are far from mere noisemakers. They're living storytellers, ritual architects, and sometimes rebellious whispers wrapped in thunder. This journey wanders through the distinct drum traditions of Japan, India, and China, where each pulse carries layers of meaning woven into cultural tapestries as rich and complex as the rhythms themselves. Take Japan's taiko drums. Their very name means big drum, but calling them just big feels like calling Mount Fuji a hill. These drums are enormous, imposing, sometimes as tall as a grown man, their bodies stretched tight with hide, their deep voices booming like distant thunderstorms rolling over the sea. The thumping of taiko isn't just music. It's an ancient calling card that must be seen and felt to be believed. Early taiko drums were tools of war, used to rally samurai on the battlefield, to send coded signals slicing through the chaos like sonic arrows. Imagine warriors, muscles taut and eyes sharp, synchronizing their attacks to the relentless hammering. Focus forged by rhythm, but taiko quickly evolved beyond the martial. In the sacred here and now of Shinto festivals, these drums thunder like celestial hearts, drawing communities together with a raw, primal energy that's part prayer, part party, and all spectacle. The performance screams with vigor. Dancers move like controlled storms, arms swinging powerful sticks, feet pounding on wooden planks, bodies exploding with the joy and precision of a well-oiled machine. It's not just entertainment. It's communication without words. Ancestral voices pulsing through the air, telling stories of gods, seasons, and the relentless dance between humans and the natural world. Cross the Sea of Japan and journey to India, where the tabla reigns supreme in a very different way. If taiko is a thunderclap, tabla is a conversation between whispers and bursts of laughter, a language sculpted into rhythmic syllables, played with nimble fingers dancing over small drums. These drums don't just play notes, they speak. The topless patterns can mimic the tone and cadence of human speech so closely that musicians claim it's possible to talk through them. Storytelling in Indian classical music is highly improvisational, and the tabla serves as a sharp-witted companion, punctuating tales with bursts of intricate rhythms that can mimic a sudden storm, a lover's hesitation, or the stealthy steps of a hunter. Moreover, teblabling is a sacred tradition passed down through generations of gurus and disciples, each adding their touch but always respecting the invisible threads of history. The instruments themselves, those deceptively simple drums made from wood, leather, and a mysterious black spot called syahi, are masterpieces of acoustical design. The syahi alters overtones, giving the tabla its signature singing clarity. To the untrained ear, it's easy to miss the subtle differences between strokes, but to the initiate, every tap is a word, every roll a sentence in an epic poem spun not with ink, but with flesh and sound. Shift now to the vast empires of ancient China, where drums took on a character as dramatic as strategic as the dynasties that rose and fell. Chinese war drums were the original psychological warfare specialists. Before the invention of radio or gunpowder, armies relied on these booming beasts to send orders, induce fear in enemies, and bolster the morale of their own. Imagine thousands of men on a stretched battlefield, shrouded in dust and tension, when suddenly a colossal roar erupts from rows of drums. It's the thundering heartbeat of the army itself, a chilling signal that might portend an advance, a retreat, or an ominous strategy designed to unnerve foes. But drums in China were not only used in war. They had sacred and imperial duties too. The ancient Chinese believed the drum's sound bound heaven and earth, serving as a cosmic conductor in rituals conducted by emperors who claimed divine right to rule. The famous Great Drum of the Forbidden City was more than a musical instrument. It was a symbol of imperial power and cosmic order. Each beat marked the passage of time, the change of seasons, and announced voice that required the attention of a vast empire. The drum's voice was law, unquestionable and omnipresent. These Chinese drums were often adorned with dragons and phoenixes, carved meticulously, turning them into works of art that visually echoed their profound spiritual significance. The sense that the very skin of the drum holds the breath of dragons isn't just poetic license. It's a glimpse into a worldview where nature, myth, and politics form a triad of unbreakable bones, all pulsing through the drum's voice. What ties these traditions together? Japan's thunderous taiko, India's articulate tabla, and China's commanding war drums is not just the skin stretched over wood. It's the human heartbeat underneath. These drums, magnified and transformed, act as conduits for community, spirituality, and survival. The pulse of a taiko sends adrenaline rushing, aligning bodies in shared moments of ecstatic sacrifice. The tabla weaves stories that flex the intellect and emotion simultaneously. The Chinese war drum rallies warriors and aligns empire to cosmic order, reminding all who hear it that sound can be as powerful a weapon as any sword. Drumming across Asia reveals rhythms of resistance too. In some eras, playing drums was an act of rebellion, an assertion of cultural identity under oppressive rule, or a coded message passed through seemingly innocent celebrations. Imagine, if you will, a group of villagers using the steady cadence of drum beats as a clandestine telegram, challenging colonizers who underestimated the power of rhythm to unify and inspire. Drums became the voices of the voiceless, the thunderous embodiment of hopes and defiance hammered out in flesh and wood. Through Asia's drum traditions, what might seem like simple musical instruments emerge as cosmic communicators, social glue, and sometimes weapons in the eternal battle of identity and power. Their stories thump on, reminding us that beneath every civilization's polished surface beats a raw human heart, sometimes pounding in joy, sometimes war, sometimes rebellion, but always beating, always alive. It's hard to overstate how deeply the drum pulses through the very core of Middle Eastern life, a heartbeat that echoes through deserts and bustling bazaars alike, binding together faith, celebration, and community with a rhythmic thread nearly as old as civilization itself. Picture a moonlit night somewhere in the Levant or the Arabian Peninsula, where the sharp clack of wooden drumsticks against stretched animal skins slices through the still air. This is no mere entertainment. It's a sacred summons, a call to gather, to transform the mundane into something charged with meaning, as unyielding as the deserts and as fluid as the shifting sands. Drums in this region did not simply mark time. They became the language of the gods and a people. Whether in the hallowed courtyards of ancient mosques or under the tented roofs of Bedouin gatherings, the pulsating rhythm was a vessel for the intangible, a sonic bridge between the earthly and the divine. Religious ceremonies here were anything but silent prayers. The beat of the drum was the heartbeat of belief itself, orchestrating the rise and fall of chants, facilitating trance states in Sufi rituals, and summoning spirits in a dance of sound and soul. Console the deaf, a frame drum with jingles edgewise, its metal rings shimmering like stars frozen in sound. It wasn't just an instrument, it was the sonic embodiment of joy, sorrow, and ecstasy. In Sufi dervish ceremonies, known as dhikr, the repetitive hypnotic drum beats formed a hypnotic backdrop, spinning devotees into ecstatic whirls that blurred the boundaries between self and divine. The drum's rhythm was a mantra, a pulse that coerced the spirit to shed earthly shackles, transcending mortal concerns. And it did so not with solemn whispering, but with loud, unapologetic beats that took no prisoners. But the drum's sacred role didn't end at the mosque's threshold. Step into a Middle Eastern wedding, and you're thrown into a sensory blitz. Layers of sound, color, and movement. The dubki and the tabla join forces here, sometimes solo acts, sometimes in chaotic harmony, pumping out beats that are impossible to ignore. Weddings in this region are legendary affairs, often lasting for days, and the drum is the undisputed star of this social opera. It insists people dance, even if their hips protest the next day, and lends a soundtrack of jubilant defiance against life's inevitabilities. It's not just music, it's a declaration. We survive, we celebrate. The drum was also a storyteller. In communal gatherings, its reverberations shaped narratives without words. A certain rhythm could evoke an ancient victory, a whispered tragedy, or the steady hum of daily life. In Bedouin camps spread across the vast wilderness, drums punctuated tales told around the fire, underscoring every twist like a suspenseful soundtrack. It was this ability to convey layers of meaning that gave the drum its social power. To beat a drum was to speak in a language everyone understood, a language more potent than words alone, capable of fostering unity without the need for a single syllable. It's tempting to romanticize these scenes, but the reality was often harsher. And that's where the drum's role becomes even more fascinating. Given the fractious nature of Middle Eastern societies, tribal loyalties, sectarian divides, political upheavals, the drum was much more than a festive instrument. It was a tool of resistance and identity. Some tribes and religious groups used specific drum patterns to assert their unique identity, a sonic badge worn loud and proud to differentiate friend from foe. And in times of oppression or conflict, the drum beats sometimes became signals, secret codes sent through rhythm rather than speech, carrying warnings or rallying calls across the dunes when words could not safely be spoken. This dual existence of the drum, poised between sacred ceremony and earthy defiance, paints a vivid picture of Middle Eastern culture. It was a society where music and faith were inseparable, where community was reinforced through shared beats, and where resistance could be as simple as a hand on a drumhead, every tap a heartbeat, every rhythm a story, and every story a thread weaving together the turbulent tapestry of human life in a land as unforgiving as it is beautiful. So next time you hear the steady thudding of a drum, whether at a festival or in a quiet corner of some ancient city, remember this: you're not just hearing music, you're hearing history. The lives of empires and peasants, saints and sinners, lovers and warriors, all beating together in the eternal human pulse. Drums in the Middle East weren't background noise. They were the voice of a civilization carried on the winds, unmistakable and unstoppable. Drumming has always been more than just sound. It's the heartbeat of a people, a living language pulsing through the air. But what happens when that heartbeat is targeted, silenced, or turned into a threat? As colonial powers marched into new lands with swords, crosses, and law books, they carried a peculiar obsession with control, especially over those powerful, booming drums. To the colonizers, indigenous drums were more than musical instruments. They were coded messages, rallying cries, sorcery tools, and expressions of identity that defied domination. So the drums had to go, or at least be tamed. Across continents, from the forests of the Americas to the islands of Africa and the vast stretches of Oceania, colonial regimes unleashed bans and brutal crackdowns on drumming. Take North America, for example. European settlers didn't just dismiss indigenous drumming as noisy background. They feared it as a pulse that could unite resistance. In the 1800s, several tribes faced explicit laws forbidding not only drums, but also traditional dances. Imagine being told that your pulse, your community's voice, was illegal, branded as rebellious or even pagan. Christian missionaries called the drum's beat devil's noise, with some reports describing the sight of a drum circle as a congregation of heathen conspirators. The irony? This noise was as vital to survival as water or air. In the Caribbean and West Africa, the story was no less grim. The transatlantic slave trade uprooted entire cultures, and with them came the rhythms that slaves clung to for sanity and solidarity. Plantation owners feared the drum's coded signals, whispering of uprisings and escape plans hidden beneath the layers of complex rhythms. So laws were passed to suppress drumming, and punishments for playing the forbidden beat were harsh, ranging from imprisonment to exile or worse. The drums didn't vanish quietly. They survived underground, in whispers and secret gatherings, like ghosts of resistance haunting the oppressive silence. The irony of colonial bands was that they only made the drum's message louder. When you're told to be quiet, the urge to speak up gets fiercer. Indigenous and enslaved peoples didn't simply let their drums grow mute. Instead, the drum beats mutated, encoded, and disguised themselves. In some communities, rhythms were woven into everyday tasks, a call and response chant on the rice fields or coded beats replicated with sticks on buckets when drums were confiscated. Drumming became an act of quiet rebellion, a secret handshake passed through generations. In settler colonies like Australia and New Zealand, the story added yet another layer of complexity. The arrival of British colonists wasn't just about land. It was about erasing indigenous identity. Aboriginal drumming rituals were repeatedly banned or blamed for uncivilized behavior. Yet, even in the face of systemic attempts to erase them, these rhythms persisted, sometimes hidden beneath the surfaces of new Christian ceremonies, or reframed in ways the colonizers didn't immediately recognize as indigenous. Adaptation was survival. The drum rhythms became a shapeshifter, sneaked into modern music forms, and later a key symbol in cultural revival movements. One particularly fascinating instance was the way drumming found its voice in the resistance movements that erupted throughout colonized lands. Think of the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya or the Maroon rebellions in the Caribbean. Drums weren't just beaters of time. They communicated tactical information between groups separated by forest, jungle, or ocean. This wasn't just drumming. It was a covert transmission system, an encrypted war code. Colonizers, ever obsessed with control, often underestimated the ingenuity of rhythms. One moment, a sequence could sound like a dance call. The next, a clear warning or a strategic command. But colonial authorities didn't just aim to silence drumming. They also sought to civilize it, turning it into a controlled spectacle for tourists or missionaries. Indigenous ceremonies were sometimes altered to fit the colonizers' expectations. Drums were used as quaint background music, stripped of meaning. Imagine a sacred drum beat meant to mark the cycle of life, to call ancestors, to summon spirits, dumbed down to an exotic soundtrack for foreign observers sipping coffee and nodding politely. This appropriation was another form of erasure, rendering the drum's rich language into mere entertainment. Still, the resilience of these rhythms is the real story here. Drums that once echoed through forbidden forests and shadowed camps have roared back in the modern era. They've fueled cultural renaissances, political protests, and artistic revolutions. The very instruments that colonizers tried to suppress have transformed into powerful symbols of identity and resistance. They remind us that culture is not a fragile artifact, but a dynamic pulse that can survive even the harshest attempts at erasure. And if you listen closely, those drum beats continue to whisper truths today about survival, adaptation, and the unbreakable human spirit. The attempts to silence them only made their voices more urgent, more passionate. Like the human heart they so vividly imitate, drums beat on, refusing to stop. Even when faced with bans, burnings, and brutal punishment, their rhythm remains steady, defiant, alive. In the end, colonial suppression may have tried to clip the wings of the drum's voice, but it failed to snuff out its fire. Drums survived not just by hiding or muting, but by evolving, finding new rhythms, new places, and new meanings. The story of drumming under colonization is a story of cultural resilience written in sound waves. Proof that when the heart is silenced, it often beats louder than ever. Imagine the thunderous pulse of a drum echoing across a dusty village in West Africa, an ancient heartbeat calling people together, not just to dance or celebrate, but to communicate complex messages, to mark sacred moments, to resist erasure. Now, fast forward to the brutal Middle Passage, where those very rhythms, those lifelines of identity, were thrown into the crucible of the transatlantic slave trade. How do you keep a language alive when your voice is stolen, your homeland obliterated, and your body shackled? The answer is simpler and more profound than one might expect. You keep drumming. When millions were ripped from the coasts of Africa between the 16th and 19th centuries, the shipholds they were crammed into weren't just prisons. They were floating ovens of despair where the beat of the drum could have easily been silenced forever. Yet enslaved peoples clung to their rhythms like rafts in a stormy sea. Drums were transformed from village tools and spiritual conduits into secret codes of communication and resilience. On plantations, where languages were forcibly stripped and native customs outlawed with ruthless efficiency, the drum became a vessel of survival. But it wasn't just the physical drum that survived. It was the very idea of rhythm, embedded deep in memory and muscle. Some enslaved people smuggled small drums like precious relics, stitched inside clothing or disguised under piles of scraps. Others turned their bodies into percussion instruments, clapping hands and stamping feet to replicate the sounds their captors tried to suppress. Because rhythm, after all, is contagious and defiant in equal measure, a communal heartbeat demanding recognition, even when everything else is designed to erase you. The colonial slave owners quickly caught on. Drums were dangerous. Too dangerous, in fact. Drumming could be a signal for rebellion, a way to summon others in dangerous numbers, or a spiritual weapon invoking deep ancestral powers. In many parts of the Americas, drumming, along with other forms of native expression, was banned outright. Plantation overseers banned gatherings, confiscated drums, and punished those caught drumming with brutal severity. You can almost imagine the sheer paranoia of men who understood, perhaps instinctively, that this rhythmic language was more than noise. It was a living, breathing form of resistance. Yet, despite severe repression, enslaved Africans innovated. Drums evolved both physically and symbolically. When actual drums were banned, rhythms found new hosts. The cane, or call and response psalms, the clapping of hands, the stomped feet, and the ingenious repurposing of makeshift percussion instruments forged from the materials at hand. In many cases, the African drum's spirit metamorphosed into new forms that blended African traditions with the harsh realities of life in the Americas. For example, in Brazil, the use of the atabaque drum became central to candomblé rituals, spiritual ceremonies merging African religion with local influences. In Haiti, the Durkrid drumming of Vodou ceremonies carried forward a direct link to African ancestors, a sonic train unbroken by savage displacement. It's important to recognize that these whims were not merely for show. Each beat told stories. They mapped escape routes, celebrated cultural memories, communicated warnings, and forged connections that could crack the lonely darkness of captivity. Enslaved communities used drumming as a tool for social cohesion, creating new kinship ties, nurturing shared identities, and even maintaining diplomatic relations between different African ethnic groups who found themselves forced together in strange and hostile lands. One fascinating example is the rhythmic talking drum tradition, where the drum mimics the tonal patterns of African languages, almost like a coded Morse code of the original homeland. When language was forcibly suppressed under the yoke of slavery, drums spoke when mouths couldn't. Through complex tones and patterns, they spread news of resistance, escaped slaves, or gatherings long before written words ever appeared. It's a bit like having a secret group chat before smartphones, a sonic underground network that kept the flicker of freedom alive. But there's another layer to this rhythmic saga: transformation. African drumming didn't just survive abrasive displacement, it thrived, infecting the musical and cultural landscapes of the Americas in ways still felt today. The pulsating beats of Afro-Caribbean drums gave birth to entire musical genres. Salsa, samba, rumba, and reggae owe an undeniable debt to these ancestral rhythms. Even blues, jazz, and funk owe their syncopated tempos and call and response patterns to the journey's transatlantic journey. Every time you tap your foot to a catchy beat, remember you're tapping into centuries of resistance and resilience, of methodical creativity forged in the crucible of trauma. And while many African drum traditions were altered by the brutal realities of slavery, they also adapted to new spiritual contexts. In many Afro-diasporic religions, drumming became the heartbeat of ritual and prayer, a bridge connecting the material world with the spiritual realm. Drums summoned orishas in Yoruba traditions, loa in Haitian Vodou, and ancestral spirits across Latin America. The rhythms were not just music, they were a summons to the gods, a call to the ancestors, reminding enslaved and freed peoples that their identity had not been destroyed, merely transformed and relocated. The drum's journey through the transatlantic slave trade is, in many ways, a story of unyielding human spirit. Banned, imprisoned, and dehumanized, enslaved Africans wielded drumming to carve out spaces of freedom within captivity. They orchestrated rebellions with rhythm and song. They transmitted culture through coded beats. They healed wounds with shared ceremonies. Drums stood as sonic bullets in the war against erasure, speaking without words, defying silence, demanding presence. Today, as the deep thrum of drums fills concert halls and streets worldwide, it carries with it the whispered echoes of those who refused to be silenced. Every complex rhythm, every polyrhythmic pattern tells a story of survival, adaptation, and resistance. The drum remains the human heartbeat, timeless and unbreakable, beating across oceans and centuries, reminding us that even the darkest history cannot drown out the sound of life fighting to be heard. Imagine living in a world where the very act of speaking could land you in chains, where every whispered word might be overheard by eyes lurking behind the cracked doors of watchful oppressors. Yet, despite this constant threat, communities found a pulse, a resilient heartbeat threading through the silence. Not in letters, not in spoken words, but in the rhythmic, hypnotic pounding of drums. Drums weren't just instruments, they were secret messengers, coded heartbeat signals that outran the sharp ears of tyranny. Throughout history, drums have been the original encrypted texts, the covert hotline between isolated pockets of resistance. Take, for instance, the many enslaved African communities across the Americas. Cut off from their homelands and stripped of freedom, they faced brutal overseers who suspected their every move. Speaking openly about rebellion was akin to a death sentence. So how could they possibly synchronize a revolt or share news of danger? The answer beat loud and clear in the skins of drums. But it wasn't just a matter of banging out tunes for entertainment. These drum beats formed an elaborate language, complex enough to convey warnings, directions, even entire conversations. The talking drums of West Africa, for example, could mimic the tonal patterns of language, making them a powerful tool for clandestine communication. That same tradition was smuggled across the Atlantic by enslaved people, who adapted and transformed it into a sonic lifeline under the noses of slaveholders. And it's hilarious to imagine the confusion of those plantation owners, entirely baffled by how their subjects always seemed to know when the overseer was approaching or when a secret meeting was to take place, despite attempts at surveillance. Little did they realize the drums were more than music. They were an auditory spy network working 24/7. In places like Jamaica, during the 18th century, after decades of relentless oppression, drums helped orchestrate the Maroon Raids, those daring, lightning-fast rebellions by escaped slaves fighting to keep their freedom. When words failed, a coded drum beat would alarm distant comrades, signaling the start of an ambush or a call to arms. These pulses were the guerrilla tactical texts of an unyielding spirit. The stakes couldn't have been higher. Drumming was so feared that slave owners often outright banned it, chopping it down to raw survival. In South Carolina, for instance, colonial laws forbade enslaved people from using drums or horns to prevent conspiracies, because, in truth, the powers that be knew that drums were the original social media for freedom fighters long before Instagram and Twitter. But resistance through rhythm wasn't limited to the New World. Across colonial Africa, Asia, and even Europe, oppressed groups turned to drums to evade censorship and orchestrate rebellion. In colonial India, for example, some tribes used drum beats to coordinate attacks against British forces while ensuring their plans remained shrouded, much like how encrypted messaging apps operate today. And the magic of drums wasn't simply their secrecy, it was also their ability to sustain morale. In darkest moments, when hope seemed a thin, flickering candle against a roaring storm, the steady pulse of the drum was like a rising tide in a drowning sea, a reminder that the community still breathed, still resisted, still hoped. It was a heartbeat that could not be silenced, a defiant rhythm thumping against the oppressive quiet. Drumming ceremonies often combined communication with ritual, embedding coded messages within the very fabric of cultural and spiritual practices. That meant that to the untrained ear, it was just music and dance. But beneath those ebullient celebrations lay a layered narrative of resistance, endurance, and solidarity. Imagine an entire secret meeting concealed behind the guise of a traditional festivity, an ancient form of camouflage that made modern-day spies look predictable by comparison. The echoes of these drum beats continued well into more recent history. During apartheid in South Africa, for example, underground resistance groups revived traditional drumming not only as a cultural statement, but as a coded system to evade the prying eyes of an oppressive regime. These beats carried messages between townships, inspiring strength and unity even when the walls seemed to close in tighter than ever. And let's not forget the master stroke of sonic rebellion. Drums didn't just communicate, they inspired. In moments of rebellion, the thudding beat became a rallying cry, a sonic kickstarter to collective courage. When words failed to stir the masses, those percussive rhythms ignited them. It was the pulse that matched the racing hearts of insurgents, the thrum beneath footsteps marching toward freedom. The power of drums as tools of covert communication and resistance highlights a fascinating truth about human ingenuity. When oral speech and written words were curtailed, music, often dismissed as mere entertainment, became a coded weapon wielded by the disenfranchised. It flipped the script, proving that even when the most basic freedoms were stripped away, the human spirit found ways to speak, loudly, rhythmically, defiantly, through the universal language of beat. So, the next time you hear a drum beat echo in a distant parade or a festive gathering, think of this. Beneath the surface, there lingers a profound history of survival, a secret conversation uncrypted in rhythm, echoing across centuries. Because in a world built on silencing dissent, the drum was a heartbeat too stubborn to ignore, and that, in itself, was an act of revolution. Imagine the thunderous beat of a drum slicing through the tropical night air, its steady pulse stirring the heart and shrouding the shadows with the promise, freedom is near. In revolutions from Haiti's sugarcane fields to the dense jungles of Latin America, the drum was not just an instrument, it was a battle cry, a lifeline, a secret code that fueled the fire of rebellion. Drums have always been the heartbeat of human connection, but during these seismic upheavals, their role zoomed from mere communication to a fierce emblem of resistance. Picture this: enslaved Africans in Saint-Domingue, chained and whipped beneath the blazing sun, finding in the drum a voice louder than their oppressors' shout. The drum beat was the language of hope, a rhythmic pulse that synchronized their will to fight back, to reclaim a stolen world. In the Haitian Revolution, arguably the most successful slave revolt in history, drums carried more than sound. They carried strategy. French colonial powers attempted to ban drums, recognizing them as an existential threat. Why? Because drums were the Twitter of the 18th century, sending coded messages across plantations when words were silenced. With no internet, no encrypted apps, the drum's resonant voice dashed through cane fields and dense forests, uniting rebel factions scattered like sparks ready to ignite a wildfire. Toulouse-Lautrec, in his more serene imaginings, might have missed the chaos, but here drums summoned armies. The rebellion's leader, Toussaint Louverture, was known to use drums as tactical signaling, coordinating troop movements and synchronizing attacks. A miscommunication in battle was often fatal, but the drums cut through confusion like a machete through underbrush. Each beat told a story. Advance, retreat, hold the line. The drum was the pulse of revolution. Beyond the battlefield, these drum rhythms were woven into ritual and spirit. Many rebels were descendants of African cultures where drums had sacred importance, connected to ancestors and gods. Beating the drum was more than code. It was a prayer, an invocation of strength and protection. The drum summoned the spirits of freedom fighters past, reminding rebels that they carried not just their own hopes, but the legacy of generations who refused to be broken. The drum echoed with centuries of pain, resilience, and defiance. This fusion of the spiritual and the practical soon reverberated beyond Haiti. Across Latin America, the drum strode beside the muskets of revolutionaries. In the dense Bolivian jungles, where Simón Bolívar carved his path to independence, indigenous drums melded with European war tactics, creating a sonic bridge between worlds. Rebel armies used drums to awaken the courage of the oppressed and to communicate across vast rugged terrains where shouting orders was a luxury. The drum transcended languages and social divides. It was the universal heartbeat of uprising. But it wasn't only freedom fighters who wielded the drum's power. Colonial rulers tried and failed to control it. In many regions, authorities banned drums outright, fearing their ability to mobilize. Imagine outlawing a heartbeat. How deeply does that cut into a people's identity? In some cases, colonial militias would storm villages, smashing drums and arresting drummers, like knocking out an insurgent's vocal cords. Yet the drumbeat persisted, underground and resilient, sometimes concealed under the guise of festivals or sacred ceremonies. In Cuba, for example, the drum accompanied the rumble of resistance in the 19th century wars for independence from Spain. Though colonial powers attempted to suppress African-derived musical practices, the bata drums and rumba rhythms survived, becoming symbols of cultural pride layered over the urgent need for liberty. The drums were more than instruments. They were living defiance, a sonic middle finger chopped out of skin and wood and animal hide. This rhythmic resistance wasn't always about open warfare. Sometimes the drum was a rallying point in secret meetings, a carefully controlled breath between moments of tense planning. It encoded messages impossible for enemy ears to understand: where to gather, when to strike, who to trust. Drums also played a critical psychological role. Can you imagine the morale boost that a steadfast drumbeat gave to exhausted, under-equipped rebels facing professional armies? The drum's steady cadence was an auditory anchor, something physical to hold on to amid chaos. It mimicked the heartbeat of the revolution itself, sometimes tentative, sometimes furious, always alive. Hearing the drum meant you weren't alone. You were part of a movement bigger than fear. And the drum's influence didn't stop with the battles themselves. After independence was achieved, drumming remained a potent symbol of identity and unity. It became integrated into national ceremonies, folk traditions, and collective memory. Sometimes that meant the drum's history was sanitized for official narratives, but its raw power always lingered beneath the surface, reminding people of the stakes and sacrifices behind so-called freedom. So what does it say that an instrument so simple, so primal, became such a powerful revolutionary tool? Maybe it's that beneath colonial guns and guillotines, beneath political speeches and treaties, what truly moved people was rhythm, something primal and human. Drums embodied a rebellion against silence, a refusal to be erased. They shouted louder than cannons, danced harder than oppression, and beat stronger than despair. And, of course, the irony. Colonial powers, with their fancy rifles and hierarchical armies, were outpaced in communication by skin stretched tight over hollow wood. The humble drum was a revolutionary's secret weapon long before Wi-Fi made instant messages possible. It was a reminder that in the struggle for freedom, sometimes the oldest tools are the deadliest. From the shadowy sugar plantations of San Domingue to the sun-drenched hills of Latin America, drums were not just instruments of music, they were instruments of liberation. They carried the call to arms, the sacred rituals of hope, and the stubborn heartbeat of human dignity that refused to be silenced. No army could march without a beat, and no revolution could sing without its drums. Drums have always been more than mere instruments. They are the very pulse of human expression. Long before amps and auto-tune, before the first scratch on a vinyl record, the steady beat of a drum was humanity's rawest heartbeat, a language of rhythms that transcended words. By the time jazz clubs buzzed with life in New Orleans or Chicago, and later when the streets echoed with hip-hop anthems, those ancient beats were still thumping underneath it all, invisible threads tying tradition to innovation. Take jazz, for instance, a genre born in the crucible of African American communities in the early 20th century. Its improvisational spirit, syncopated rhythms, and bold swing feel can be traced directly back to African drumming practices brought over by enslaved peoples. But it wasn't just a simple carryover. Imagine drummers in New Orleans pounding on whatever they could find: pots, pans, discarded barrels, transforming old tribal patterns into something new, something electric and alive. The drum kit itself was a 20th century invention, a way to mimic the communal drumming of village gatherings with a one-man band. Without those roots, jazz might have ended up as nothing more than a polite dance form. Instead, it became a rebellious heartbeat, refusing to be tamed. Then there's the blues, that soulful moan of pain and hope, carved into every note. Originating from the Mississippi Delta's sharecroppers and field hands, blues rhythms owe a great debt to African drumming's call and response dynamic and the complex polyrhythms that made the simplest beat feel like a thunderstorm rolling in. The drum patterns, often subtle, sometimes almost hidden beneath raspy guitars and mournful vocals, carried a weight of suffering, resilience, and, yes, defiance. When you tap your foot to a blues groove, you're feeling centuries of hardship distilled into something deeply personal, yet universal. Fast forward to hip-hop in the Bronx during the 1970s, where the drum's role evolved again, this time becoming a weapon of cultural identity and resistance. DJs like Kool Herc borrowed from the traditional breakbeat, isolating and looping the percussion segments of funk and soul records. This wasn't just about dance parties. It was an act of reclaiming space, of asserting voice in neighborhoods ravaged by economic neglect and social marginalization. The drum poundings underpinning hip-hop tracks became the soundtrack to a generation's struggle for recognition, respect, and change. They echoed the heartbeat of a community that refused to be ignored. But drums did more than shape music. They became integral to protest movements across the 20th and 21st centuries, a universal call to arms. Picture the freedom fighters in South Africa using drums during anti-apartheid rallies, not just as rhythm, but as coded communication that united masses under the looming threat of repression. Or recall the Native American activists at Wounded Knee, where the drum beat was a sacred pulse, grounding their resistance in ancestral power. Even the civil rights marches in the United States often featured drumming, not just as accompaniment, but as a form of spiritual sustenance, a rhythmic heartbeat that kept hope alive during dark times. Drums possess an almost primal authority. They bypass the mind and speak directly to the body. They relentless thump like a reminder. We are here. We are many. We will not be silenced. In the streets of Cairo during the Arab Spring, protesters beating on drums and metal surfaces created not just noise, but a communal heartbeat that bonded strangers into a movement. The drum beat became a protest chant without words, a physical manifestation of unity and defiance. And yet, history hasn't always been kind to the drum's raw power. In many colonized regions, rulers banned drumming, fearing its capacity to mobilize and communicate clandestinely. Sometimes drummers faced imprisonment, brutal punishment, or worse. The drum was a threat, a revolutionary tool disguised as music. That's the paradox. Something as simple as a rhythmic beat could topple empires or ignite fires of rebellion. It demands attention and respect. In contemporary music, where technology can generate hundreds of beats per minute from a laptop, the organic, physical impact of the drum still matters. Consider how modern drummers blend traditional rhythms with electronic production, paying homage to their ancestors while pushing the envelope. It's a vivid reminder that, despite centuries of evolution, the drum's core remains unchanged. It's a heartbeat, endlessly beating, endlessly human. So next time you hear a snare roll or a bass drum thud in a song, whether it's the smooth shuffle behind a jazz solo, the gritty snap of a blues band, or the sharp kicks in a hip-hop track, remember that it's not just background noise. You're hearing a living, breathing conversation between past and present, between pain and joy, defiance and celebration. The human heartbeat, carried in wood and skin and timber, still speaks louder than words, still rallies the restless, still moves the world forward. Imagine the steady pulse of a drumbeat reverberating through a dense forest or echoing across a sun-baked savanna. That primal thud isn't just a simple rhythm. It's a call that has echoed through the veins of human history, grounding us in a shared heartbeat far older than any civilization. But beyond the poetic allure, modern science is now peeling back the layers to reveal just how profoundly drumbeats, those ancient vibrations, alter the very wiring of our bodies and minds. Recent studies have uncovered something astonishing. When a group of people listen to or play drums together, their heartbeats don't just pump alongside the rudely insistent rhythms. They actually begin to synchronize with them and with each other. Think of it like a biological crowd surfing event where individual hearts beat as one, riding the rolling wave of percussion. This synchronization isn't just a quirky coincidence. It's a deep physiological alignment rooted in our biology, tying us together in ways that speak to the core of what it means to be human. Consider an experiment where volunteers gathered to play handheld drums and follow a simple, repeating beat. Monitors showed that their heart rates started to match the drum tempo, and intriguingly, over time, their heart rhythms also began syncing with each other. It's like a scientific remix of tribal gathering, only this time the drums don't just unite the group socially, they unite them biologically. This kind of heartbeat synchronization fosters a harmonious collective state, a moment where the boundaries between self and other blur, and a shared emotional energy rises. But why does this happen? From an evolutionary perspective, aligning our physiological states would have been crucial for communal survival. When a band of hunter-gatherers marched to a drum beat. Synchronized heart rates might have helped them pace their movement, regulate fatigue, or coordinate attacks and defenses with ruthless precision. Inside the cacophony of battle or ceremony, the drum was no mere sound. It was a lifeline, a command center tapping into the very network of human bodies. Delving deeper, the psychological effects turn out to be just as mind-boggling. The repetitive beat acts almost like a metronome for the brain's emotional centers. Listening to drums, and especially participating in drumming, can trigger the release of neurotransmitters such as dopamine and endorphins, chemicals responsible for feelings of pleasure and pain relief. Suddenly, banging on a drum isn't just noisy fun, it's a natural stress buster, a chemical spa for the brain. And this is more than anecdote. Research using brain imaging has shown increased activity in areas linked to emotion, memory, and social connection during communal drumming. Participants often report an uplifted mood, a reduction in anxiety, and a profound sense of belonging. What's remarkable is how these effects mimic those found in meditation and other mindfulness practices, yet without the need to sit cross-legged on a Himalayan mountaintop. Instead, the rhythm literally moves you. Picture a group of people gathered around a fire with skin slit from sweat, pounding on their drums. Isn't it easy to imagine the shared highs, the eruption of joyous catharsis spilling from synchronized beats and hearts? This rush, this ancient biochemical cocktail, is a key reason why drumming has endured across countless cultures, centuries, and continents. It's not only art or ritual, it's a therapeutic machine built into human nature. But the drum's power isn't limited to euphoria and health. It's also an instrument of resilience and resistance. History tells us that enslaved Africans in the Americas, where traditional drums were often banned by oppressive colonial regimes fearing rebellion, nevertheless found ways to keep the rhythm alive. Secret drum circles, mimicked percussive sounds, or work song rhythms infused with hidden messages became vehicles for coded communication and defiance. In these moments, the drum beat was a heartbeat of revolt, echoing hope and an unyielding will to survive. Even modern clinical research reflects this radical heritage. Drumming has been incorporated into therapies for PTSD, depression, and chronic stress disorders. Veterans, trauma survivors, and marginalized individuals gain strength in communal drumming circles, where the pulse acts as a balm, helping to mend broken emotional connections and foster renewed trust in others. The drum, in this sense, is both a mirror and a guide, reflecting internal turmoil while nudging the heart toward healing. So what is it about this pounding human impulse, the primal beat that wields such power over body and soul? Is it a relic of our evolutionary wiring, an ancient code etched in DNA? Or is it more, a symbolic language predating speech, a force that taps directly into human empathy and community? The ongoing research suggests it is all of these things, wrapped into one. Our hearts, it turns out, crave rhythm as much as they crave oxygen. Drummers' hands, striking the surface again and again, are like surgeons conducting an operation on emotions, sculpting shared experience through vibration and wave. Somehow in the thump and clash, in that relentless underlying pulse, our fragmented selves find coherence. We remember that we are part of something larger, an organism made of beating hearts, collective breath, and shared time. And isn't that the ultimate irony? The beat of a drum, a simple ancient tool, remains one of the most sophisticated ways we connect biologically and emotionally. It bridges the gap between science and ritual, between the neuron and the myth. It rewires our brains while weaving us into a communal tapestry. In short, the heartbeat of the drum is the heartbeat of humanity itself, persistent, unyielding, and utterly contagious. Every rhythm begins with a single beat. For humanity, that primordial beat wasn't just music, it was language, a summons, a challenge, the murmur of a shared heartbeat across time and space. And it was, unsurprisingly, the drum that captured this raw pulse first. But like everything entwined with human creativity, the drum refused to stay still, hemmed in by tradition or limited to mere wooden shelves and taut skins. It evolved, mirroring the arc of human innovation, from those handcrafted instruments beaten under open skies to the dazzling circuit boards hiding behind vinyl turntables today. Imagine for a moment the ancient drum. Somewhere on the dim outskirts of the world, a craftsman selected the perfect piece of wood, knotted, gnarled, and alive with the memory of 100 storms, then stretched animal hide over it like the skin of a shadow. This was no Sunday arts and crafts project. This was the first radio, the first telegram, the first Twitter feed. A pounding heart pulsed out messages no one else could heal, but everyone could feel. Fishermen sent signals. War councils summoned their troops. Rituals summoned the spirits. And in some places, drums were the very blueprint of identity, the resonating voice of a tribe or a city-state. Fast forward a millennium, or several thousand really, and the drum had earned a shiny new resume. The Middle Ages and Renaissance witnessed the drum's role shift from pure communication to theatrical accompaniment, parades, military orchestras. Yet, beneath all that pomp, the drum held one secret tightly. It was still the people's voice. The peasantry knew this. The marginalized knew it. When words were shackled, drums spoke defiantly. They became instruments of resistance before resistance was even a cool buzzword. The pounding of a drum became synonymous with unrest, with revolution, with breaking the silence imposed by tyrants and oppressors. Then came the industrial era, rolling in like an ecstatic, smoke-belching juggernaut. Suddenly, drums could be mass-produced, standardized, made with precise tuning pegs and replaceable skins. The handmade, imperfect, wobbly drum across generations morphed into a polished object, uniform and reliable, less of a mystic shaman's voice, more of a professional musician's tool. Yet, ironically, that perfect uniformity birthed new frontiers of creativity. Musicians could finally experiment with rhythm and sound without wrestling with faulty instruments. The drum kit was born, the slick, multi-drum setup that exploded in jazz clubs, speakeasies, and rock venues alike. Each drummer a pulsing engine powering genres that defined eras. Speaking of innovation, how about the drum's rebellious flirtation with technology? Drum machines, electronic pulsations, synthesized beats. The 20th century's latter half made it glaringly clear that the drum wasn't just an ancient relic. It was morphing into something futuristic, almost alien. Early drum machines were clunky, simplistic affairs, sounding like a robot with a cold. But in their humble beep-boop form, they unlocked an audacious promise. A one-person percussion army, an indefatigable rhythm section that never slept, never missed a beat. And so, genres that hinged on these precise digital pulses emerged: electronic dance music, hip-hop, techno, rhythms built not on Sturks hooting skins, but on code and circuitry. Suddenly, a teenager in a bedroom could mimic a whole band, grinding out beats that compelled millions worldwide to move, think, resist, and dream. Oh, the irony that the drum, once a rustic call to arms or ceremony, found new life in headphones, clubs, and festival grounds, often faceless and synthetic, yet undeniably powerful. Yet, before you imagine a dystopian future where robots alone beat the drum, consider this irony. Modern drummers and producers blend the old with the new, marrying handcrafted drum sounds and classic grooves with futuristic technology. Sampling, looping, layering, all homage and innovation. Think of it as the ultimate remix of human history. The drum remains not just a tool, but a living symbol, a bridge between the primal and the modern, analog warmth and digital precision, communal heartbeat and personal expression. And here's a tidbit that will probably make you rethink the drum's place in history. The drum machine's predecessors were experimental, often mocked attempts to automate music making. Early users were derided as soulless, but today those same sounds are hailed as iconic. The raw, mechanical, too perfect beats of the Roland TR-808 reverberate through hip-hop classics, pop mega hits, and underground anthems. It's a perfect example of how technology and tradition never fully divorce. Instead, they entwine, each pushing, tugging, and redefining what rhythm means. So, what does this evolution say about us? About the human heartbeat and its eternal quest for expression? Drums, primitive or high-tech, handmade or machine-generated, remain a testament to our need to connect, communicate, and rebel. A ritual, a call to arms, a dance invitation, a coded message blasted through space and time. From hollowed logs and animal skins to glowing pads and digital output, drums have shed their skin multiple times. Always reinvented, they pulse with the same vital force that syncs us to our own biology and to one another. They remind us that technology, far from replacing our humanity, can amplify our most basic, profound urge to be heard. Whether in the thunderous echo of a distant war drum or the hypnotic loop of a chilled-out beat, the drum continues to beat. And with every beat, it writes a new chapter in the story of resistance, ritual, and communication, sometimes loud, sometimes quiet, but never silent. Around the globe, where once drums carried coded messages through jungle canopies and called warriors to battle, a vibrant renaissance is pounding away to the same primal rhythm. The drum, our oldest messenger and ritual companion, has found new life in a hyper-connected world where cultural boundaries don't just blur, they explode in a cacophony of sound, creativity, and community. No longer confined to the sacred or the ceremonial, drumming today is electrified by a dark energy, the kind that thrives in virtual spaces, festival fields, and community centers. It's a radical act of cultural exchange, a rebellion against homogenization, as ancient beats fuse seamlessly with modern beats. And it's happening everywhere, from the dusty streets of Lagos to the underground clubs of Berlin, from remote islands in the Pacific to sprawling urban sprawls in Sao Paulo. Drums pulse as loudly as ever, if not louder. Take the global phenomenon of drum circles, for instance. At first glance, they can appear as a spontaneous gathering of enthusiasts, thudding away with no rhyme or reason. But scratch beneath the surface, and you find a deeply unifying ritual where strangers, regardless of age, race, or creed, sync not just their hands, but their very souls. It's a temporary society built on rhythms. The internet has only turbocharged this experience. Platforms like YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok are bursting with drummers sharing techniques, styles, and traditions once locked away in distant elders' memories or shadowed by colonial erasers. Here's a wild image: a teenager in New York learning a traditional Senegalese rhythm from a master griot halfway across the world, all through a glowing screen. The idea that centuries-old knowledge can travel faster than a bullet train without losing its soul is nothing short of miraculous. Online communities don't just serve as educational hubs. They're spaces of resistance and preservation, buffering endangered drumming styles from cultural extinction. But it's not just preservation. These digital spaces are fertile grounds for radical hybridization. Listen to what's happening in the festival circuit. Events like the Montreal Jazz Festival, the World Drum Festival in Vancouver, and even smaller, fiercely local gatherings have become laboratories for sonic experiments. Drummers who've inherited tribal rhythms now mingle with electronic music producers, hip-hop beatmakers, and even classical percussionists. The result? Something thrillingly new, a cacophonous rebellion against genre purity. Rhythms collide and reinvent themselves, creating a soundscape that echoes our interconnected, multicultural reality. Imagine a gazelle drum blending with a springy Roland TR-808, or the thunderous powwow drums of North America shaking hands with West African djembelics through an electric mix. Some purists might call this cultural appropriation. Well, it's messy for sure, but it's also a powerful testament to human creativity. What's clear is that drumming has shifted from being a tool of isolation or singular identity to an expression of global dialogue, a musical United Nations Congress where every participant negotiates their place in rhythm. And then there's the activism. In today's world, the drum is more than an instrument. It's a megaphone for justice. Think of the street protests vibrating with percussive energy from Brazil to Hong Kong, or indigenous communities using drum beats as sonic shields against cultural erasure. When words fail or are censored, drums step up. Hundreds, thousands of hands strike skins in synchrony, creating a sonic wall too powerful to ignore. The drumbeat becomes a heartbeat for resistance, a reminder that despite centuries of oppression, the rhythm endures. Of course, the drum's newfound celebrity status isn't without complications. Commercial interests have glommed onto the scene, turning authentic drumming into festival spectacles or packaged meditation gimmicks for the yoga crowd. There's something almost tragic about seeing these ancient sounds repurposed into background music for latte sippers in overpriced cafes. But amidst the commodification, underground scenes continue to thrive, fiercely guarding the drum's raw power and cultural roots. For many communities, the drum has also become a bridge to reclaim identity. African diasporic groups in the Americas, where drums were once violently banned by sloth holders, now proudly showcase their rhythms as both art and history. Festivals dedicated to Afro-Caribbean and Afro-Brazilian drumming serve as cultural revival movements, healing old wounds through the shared language of rhythm. The drum here isn't just musical, it's historical, a pulse that defies centuries of attempted erasure. And let's not ignore the technology. Electronic drums and sophisticated sampling software have turned the drum kit into a playground of endless possibilities. Producers twist and stretch traditional drum sounds to fit into futuristic soundscapes, while virtual reality experiments are experimenting with haptic feedback to recreate drumming experiences for those unable to physically play. The ancient and the digital collide, proving once again that rhythm is not static. It's alive, evolving, adapting.
In sum,
contemporary drumming is a kaleidoscope of past and present, sacred and profane, local and global. It's a reminder that beneath the miles of cable, virtual chats, and festival crowds lies a primal human need to connect through the beat of a drum, echoing the oldest and most universal human pulse, the heartbeat. And as we navigate this noisy, fragmented world, it's comforting, even revolutionary, to know that somewhere, maybe right now, many hands are striking skins in perfect harmony, carrying the restless human spirit forward, one relentless beat at a time. Drums, the relentless pulse beneath the chaos of history, the steady heartbeat echoing through time. They are much more than mere instruments. They are living voices, tirelessly speaking in rhythms louder than any words could muster. Throughout human existence, drums have been the ultimate framework for communication, the sacred vessels of ritual and the stubborn champions of resistance, embodying a power that refuses to be silenced or ignored. Imagine for a moment a bustling ancient village. No phones, no emails, no smoke signals, just the vibration of stretched animal skins, pounding out messages clearer than a town crier's daily gossip. These primal conversations transcended language barriers, connecting communities spread over vast landscapes. The drum's voice could traverse dense forests, echo across savannas, and defy mountain ranges. It's as if the earth itself had a secret code, and drums were the keys unlocking it. When a hunter was lost, a war party assembled, or a festival summoned generations, the drums spoke the unspoken, transforming human intention into raw, audible energy. But drums weren't just functional. They were profoundly symbolic, layered with spiritual meaning. Across continents and cultures, the beating drum has been the pulse of ritual. Think about it. Drummers didn't just keep time, they conjured time. The repetitive, hypnotic cadence facilitated trance, altered states, and ceremonies where the veil between worlds thinned like worn parchment. In West African traditions, drums summoned ancestors, bridged the living and the dead, and channeled divine voices. In Native American powwows, they echoed the heartbeat of the earth itself, grounding dancers in ancient wisdom. Drums were the mystical glue that held communities together, synchronizing body and soul with the rhythms of the universe. And then there's resistance, oh sweet stubborn resistance, the beating heart of defiance reflected in the drum's thunderous roar. When oppressors sought to mute culture, erase identity, and crush spirits, the drum became a secret weapon, a clandestine beacon. Enslaved Africans in the Americas understood this better than anyone. Their stolen hands, bound and brutalized, transformed the drum into a coded language of hope and rebellion. Those rhythms transcended plantation fences, carving out spaces where centuries of oppression couldn't reach. It was a rhythm that carried messages of escape, survival, and unbroken identity. The slave owners, horrified by the drum's potential to inspire revolt, often banned or destroyed them. But the human spirit, as is the case with a stubborn drumbeat, refused to be hushed. During the Haitian Revolution, the rhythm of the drums carried more than music. It carried the very call to freedom. It was the spark that ignited the world's first successful slave revolt, a reminder that liberation was not just a dream, it was a pounding, palpable force. The rhythmic explosion of drums that had been used for centuries as a method of communication was now weaponized in the fight against tyranny. Isn't it remarkable how something as primal as a drum could shake empires? In that beating heart, history pulses with the proof that music and rhythm are intrinsically political. But their role wasn't confined to rebellion alone. Drums have been the soundtrack to social cohesion, the rhythm that brings people back from the brink. Festivals, weddings, funerals, these moments when life swings between sorrow and joy, all marked by the drum's steady pulse. It's the original universal language, reminding us collectively that no matter our differences, there's a common heartbeat beneath it all. Whether it's the cerulean waves of Polynesian conga drums or the metallic clang of Korean jangu, rhythms connect us to history's long tangled thread, weaving the personal into the communal. Even today, in our hyper-digital age, drumming retains an almost rebellious purity. In a world glued to screens and drowned in instant messages, the drum's raw sensation pulls us back to our roots. Feel the primal satisfaction, the visceral thud against the chest, the call and response that requires nothing but human presence and breath. Drums refuse to stay silent amid the internet's cacophony. They carry the echoes of ancestors and the promise of something wild and untamed beneath our polished surfaces. They have this uncanny ability to oscillate between the mundane and the mystical, the peaceful and the explosive, the deeply intimate and the broadly political. Drums are the human heartbeat, constant, defiant, resonant. More than a mere artifact of our past, they continue to embody our need to communicate beyond words, to mark time in ceremonies, and to declare resistance when all else fails. They remind us that beneath all the noise of history, beneath all the ideological battles and cultural shifts, there is that primal, stubborn pulse, the unyielding drumbeat of the human spirit, refusing to be erased or forgotten. So next time you tap your fingers or find yourself bobbing to a beat, remember this: it's not just rhythm you're drawn to. It's an ancient dialogue, a pulse transcending millennia, a call as vital as the heartbeat coursing through your veins. Drums, in all their majestic complexity, are history in motion, the language of survival, the soundtrack of awakening, and perhaps the most fundamental way humanity has ever spoken. And believe me, when drums speak, empires listen. Listen closely. The steady thump echoing in your chest is more than just biology. It's the primal drumbeat of humanity itself, an ancient rhythm that has pulsed through time and tethered us to one another in ways far deeper than words can reach. The heartbeat, that relentless percussion of life, shaped the very essence of the drum. Our first musical instrument, our earliest telephone, and ultimately our defiant battle cry. From the dawn of recorded history, drums have been much more than mere instruments. They are living symbols of connection, resistance, and ritual. But what happens when we fast forward to today, when the world is all noisy screens and buzzing notifications, and we're more used to digital beats crafted by machines than the visceral, lived experience of a hand striking taut skin? Do drums and the heartbeat rhythms they echo still hold the power they once did? Spoiler alert, they absolutely do. Far from being relics of another era, drums are alive and kicking in the heart of modern life, still calling us back to something raw, something real. Think about a crowded concert. Thousands of bodies sway while a lead percussionist commands a thunderous rhythm. You can feel the beat not just in your ears, but reverberating through your chest, reconnecting strangers through a shared pulse. That's not just music. It's a primal conversation, echoing the ancient human need to be seen, heard, and bonded. The drum's pulse still underwrites many of our most powerful collective experiences, whether in the ritual dressings of a spiritual ceremony, the euphoric crescendos of a rock festival, or the underground rallies where marginalized voices beat back against oppression. Drums have always served as a sonic middle finger to tyrants and oppressors. In the 18th and 19th centuries, enslaved Africans in the Americas risked severe punishment just to keep drumming alive. Hidden in the shadows, secret rhythms coded messages of hope, rebellion, and escape. The colonial powers may have sought to silence those drums, but the beat was unkillable. It slipped beneath floorboards, echoed through the woods, thrummed in the hearts of those who refused to be erased. The drum was resistance. Fast forward to today's world, and you still find drums at the front line of expression. When protests erupt, drums roll in the streets alongside chants and slogans. In cities from Cairo to Minneapolis, they're the heartbeat of movements calling for justice, equality, and change. The instrument that once sent coded messages in slavery's darkest hours is now amplifying cries for freedom and human dignity worldwide, proving that the drum's voice is as fierce and relevant as ever. Of course, the drum's story is not confined to battles and protests. It has been and remains a fundamental engine of creativity and spiritual expression. Across cultures, the drum invites us into altered states of consciousness, those moments where time dilates, identity blurs, and the communal and the divine intertwine. Whether it's the trance-inducing djembe rhythms in West Africa, the thunderous taiko ensembles in Japan, or the ceremonial powwow drums in Native American traditions, the drum has been a gateway between the material and the mystical. The heartbeat, in all its variations and imitations, reminds us that the drum is more than wood and skin. It embodies life itself, an audible connection to the very rhythm that sustains us. And in an age where technology mediates so much of our sensory experience, the raw, tactile exchange of a hand striking a drum is a grounding counterpoint. There's no delay, no buffering, just immediate, living sound vibrating through flesh and bone. It anchors us in presence, reminding us that no matter how tangled our digital lives become, we are still flesh and blood beings who pulse, move, and unite in rhythm. Now take this to the future. Artificial intelligence can replicate rhythms. Digital samplers can mimic any drumbeat in existence, and synthetic skins can respond to your touch with mechanical perfection. But can a machine replicate the chaotic, imperfect heartbeat of a human hand striking an ancient drum? Can it summon the collective memory, the history of resistance, the shared soul of a community, absorbed in the firelight, with drums pounding like living hearts? The answer is no, because drumming is not just about sound. It's ritual, relationship, and rebellion entwined, something that no algorithm can fully decode. The drum continues to teach us about unity and diversity, chaos and order. It reveals how universal patterns underlie our differences, how a shared rhythm can dissolve borders and prejudices. It's a reminder that long before the internet and smartphones, we were connected by something more elemental, more resilient, the pulse of the human heart mirrored in the beat of the drum. So next time you hear that deep thudding somewhere nearby, a drum circle in the park, a marching band rolling down your street, or maybe just your own heartbeat as you sit quietly, remember what you're really hearing. It's the sound of history and humanity intertwined. It's the sound of us. And as this chapter closes on the long and winding journey of the drum, consider this. In every beat that continues to echo today, there is a story of survival, creativity, and unbreakable spirit. A story still being written by every hand that strikes a drum, every foot that moves to the rhythm, every soul that refuses silence. The human heartbeat will never stop, and neither will the drum. They are the pulse of our past, the rhythm of our present, and the call to the future. And that, perhaps, is the most profoundly reassuring rhythm of all.